It's been less than a week since 007 First Light dropped, and I just finished my first playthrough of the game recently, which you can watch on my YouTube channel right now. In this video, I wanted to discuss my overall thoughts on this game, what I liked, what I disliked, and most importantly of all, what I want to see next from this game in the future. So, let's waste no more time and dive into the video. Now let's discuss the positives, and I can think of no better place to start than by explaining the reason why this game is an absolute must-play for any Bond fan, because this game provides a masterful simulation of the James Bond fantasy. It's a game that makes you feel like you're James Bond, experiencing an interactive James Bond movie as you explore QLab and all of the gadgets that it has to offer, driving Aston Martins, traveling the world, and embarking on adventurous missions where sometimes you have to conduct actual spy work. You don't just shoot everything that moves like in a typical action game. There is a 50-50 balance of investigative spy work and high-octane action. Not to mention, in the game's secondary mode, the tactical simulations, which is very similar to the virtual combat training simulator from 2002's Die Another Day, you can play around with the game's mechanics to your heart's content, and also customize Bond with a variety of different weapons, gadgets, and outfits, some of these outfits lifted directly from the movies themselves. The tac sim goes a long way to further accentuate the Bond fantasy, because the amount of customization it gives you can go a long way to help you embody all of your favorite versions of the character. This leads us to discussing the story and characters themselves. The story is entertaining and fun for the most part, although there were some minor flaws that I will discuss later in the cons section of the video. The story kept me on my toes and sometimes made me unsure of how it was all going to conclude, with part of the reason for that being because you don't know whether or not to trust if someone is truly good or bad. You start off the game believing that a specific character is going to be the villain of the game, only to have the rug pulled out from under you as you learn just how deep the rabbit hole of villainy goes. However, the shining light when it comes to this game's story are the characters themselves. The main cast of characters who work at MI6 are all very likable, with the standouts being Bond himself and Q. Greenway also becomes quite likable by the end of the game, although you start off not really liking his character much due to how cold and jaded he is at first. As for the man himself, James Bond, the story centers around Bond in his younger years, when he first joins MI6 and begins training to become a spy. Bond is both familiar and unfamiliar in this game. You recognize a lot of the traits and characteristics in this younger version of the character that the older version from the movies embodies. But he also has a much more youthful energy to him, much more light-hearted in spirit. This younger version of the character is one that we've never seen before, but is portrayed masterfully by actor Patrick Gibson. He's the first actor to play a younger version of the character, and he does it so well. He's very charismatic and likable in the role of Bond, and I genuinely hope we get more James Bond games with him in the lead role. Not just because he's such a good actor, but also because I'm very excited to see Gibson's Bond eventually evolve into the older, more mature, more experienced version of the character that we're all familiar with from the movies. Not to mention, from all of the interviews I've seen with Patrick Gibson, he's a very likable person who clearly has a lot of passion for the James Bond franchise, and seeing how much he loves James Bond is very endearing and makes him feel very down-to-earth and relatable. Gibson isn't the only actor who is great in this game too. The entire cast as a whole is very talented, and not once did I see a bad performance. Anyway, as for the gameplay itself, it's very solid. All of the investigative missions were very refreshing for a game like this, where each level feels like a puzzle where you have to investigate and conduct actual spy work in order to progress, such as manipulating or persuading other people, stealing key items around the level, or eavesdropping on nearby conversations in order to get clues. But when it comes to the action, that's where I believe the gameplay truly shines. The stealth mechanics are incredibly basic and undoubtedly designed to be accessible, but the hand-to-hand combat and shooting are really good. Shootouts in this game are much better than IO's previous work in the Hitman franchise, especially by World of Assassination standards, as the shooting in that game is cumbersome and a little janky by design, in order to encourage you to play more stealthily. Firstlight's shooting mechanics, on the other hand, are way more fun, satisfying, and also surprisingly well thought out, as you don't have to shoot enemies dead, you can just simply shoot them in the legs to immobilize them or shoot their guns out of their hands, which goes a long way to add so much flavor and depth to the combat, and gives you the freedom to approach combat situations very creatively. The standout of the game's combat system, however, is when it comes to the hand-to-hand combat. Firstlight features one of the best hand-to-hand fight mechanics I've experienced in gaming, and if you thought the gunfights in this game offered tons of creativity, the fistfights offer even more. It's a very Batman Arkham-inspired combat system with a little bit of sleeping dogs mixed in, with the ability to counter and dodge large numbers of enemies, but you can also grab enemies, bash them into the furniture or walls, toss them over cliffs and railings, do a couple combos, throw random objects at them, throw your gun at them, and so much more. Every fistfight in this game feels like a chaotic bar brawl, and it's incredibly fun. Not only that, but the way James Bond fights in this game feels, well, so much like James Bond. The fistfights feel just as scrappy and brutal as they are in the movies, and really hammers home the fact that James Bond is a character who is often described as a blunt instrument. Anyway, overall, I would highly recommend this game just simply due to the fact that this is a game that not only feels incredibly authentic to the movies and books, but also feels like a celebration of everything Bond, a love letter to the entire franchise, especially with all of the references, callbacks, and etc. featured throughout the game. Plus, 007 First Light feels like a product that is more than just a game, it feels like the next big Bond outing. Sure, it's a video game instead of a movie, but it absolutely does feel like a new era for the franchise. It feels like the next big Bond movie, and it's all thanks to how masterful the game's overall presentation is. However, this game isn't entirely perfect, and there are some flaws that I want to dive into real quick. So I mentioned earlier that there was a minor flaw when it came to this game's story, and that was without a doubt the villains. A lot of the villains in this game are very uninteresting and one-note. Their evil plan was certainly very interesting and topical for the time that we live in, and I enjoyed that aspect of the villains, but everything else about them is uninteresting. Especially the character of Damien, the man in the golden mask, who feels like such wasted potential for somebody with such a cool character design. And like I said earlier, the villains feel one note, and Damien is a great example of that. There isn't really a whole lot to his character besides the fact that he's an unhinged, violent psychopath. Like, that's literally his entire personality, very surface level and a little boring. However, I wouldn't have minded how surface level and one-note Damien was if the other villains in this game helped compensate by being much more interesting and fleshed out. Having at least one villain that was multi-dimensional and interesting would have gone a long way, but none of them were, so that aspect of the story was kind of disappointing. Another criticism I have towards this game is that all of the characters in this game's world don't react if you do something super suspicious right in front of them, which kind of ruins the immersion. One of the greatest strengths of IO's previous game, Hitman World of Assassination, was the fact that the people in that game realistically reacted to every little thing you would do, and the world you inhabited within this game felt so real and lived in as a result. I was expecting the non-player characters in 007 First Light to be the same, but they're not. You can shoot a laser at some random person with your laser watch and nobody will notice or react to that. And sometimes if you're beating up someone, a guard on the other side of the room won't even notice despite the fact they are just standing 10 feet away from you. It's kind of funny, not gonna lie, just randomly shooting lasers at people and nobody cares, or beating someone up and people standing nearby rarely notice. But it's incredibly immersion breaking and makes it makes the world feel fake instead of real. If IO ever makes a sequel to this game, one of the improvements at the top of my wishlist would be for the people in this game to react much more realistically to the things you do and just overall feel less oblivious and brain dead. Anyway, there's one last flaw of this game I want to quickly go over. And to this game's credit, I don't think it'll be a flaw for much longer because it's more of a technical issue, and issues like this with games are usually fixed later on post-launch, but it's still worth mentioning anyway. So, yeah, there were some minor technical issues I had with this game, nothing game-breaking thankfully, but still kind of random or annoying. For example, the game crashed a couple of times for me throughout my playthrough. Not sure how those crashes happened, but they did. And what was truly annoying about those crashes was that they would take me 5 or 10 minutes back, and everything I did within that period of time I would have to do all over again. There was also kind of a funny bug I had, where during one of the game's cutscenes, people in the background would randomly appear out of nowhere, which was funny, but also very immersion-breaking. I'm expecting those two minor technical flaws, and any other technical issues the game might have, to be ironed out in future updates, so I'm not going to hold them against the game too much, but it's all still worth mentioning. Anyway, now that you know what I liked and disliked about the game the most, it's time to explore the future. What new content do I want to see added to this game in future updates? So suffice to say, with 007 First Light, IO has laid a magnificent foundation for future Bond content and future Bond games moving forward. I would love to see sequels to First Light with Patrick Gibson reprising his role as 007, but let's focus on the present for now. What new content do I personally want to see the developers add next to First Light? My wishes mainly revolve around the Taxim game mode and how hungry I am for new Taxim content. I really want this game mode to be as fleshed out as much as humanly possible in the future with an abundance of new missions and unlockables. It currently feels very bare bones, but that's a flaw which is easily forgiven due to the fact that IO is undoubtedly going to expand upon it with new content in the near future. Adding new missions and game modes is a desire that is pretty self-explanatory, just more things to do in Taxim in general would be pretty good. I'd love to see more missions in the Taxim that feel more sandboxy, as a lot of the missions we have so far are pretty restrictive and force you to do things a specific way. Having missions that feel more like Hitman's Freelancer mode would be fantastic, where you have total freedom over how you want to tackle each objective, lethally, non-lethally, stealthily, guns blazing, you get the idea. Also, due to the nature of Taxim allowing you a lot more customization with the clothes that Bond wears and the weapons he uses, I'd love to see even more, especially stuff that's lifted from the films, more guns that Bond uses in the movies, more outfits that he uses in the movies. Hell, I'd even like to see more watches. There's a watch skin option in the game's options menu, and as a huge watch enthusiast, I'd love to see IO use this as a way to let us use all of the other Amiga watches that Bond has used throughout the movies, with the GoldenEye Seamaster and the No Time to Die Seamaster at the top of my wishlist. I'd also love to use a lot of the outfits Bond has worn throughout the films too, particularly ones from the Craig era of movies. We already have a few Craig-style outfits, with my favourite being the Spectre turtleneck, but I'd love to see more. Hell, I'd love to see more outfits from all of the other Bonds too. Let's give Patrick Gibson's Bond a clown outfit like Roger Moore. Why the hell not at this point? Have you seen all of the alternate costumes in Hitman World of Assassination? IO has certainly created crazier outfits before. The last thing on my wish list for the future doesn't have anything to do with Taxim whatsoever, but instead the game's story mode. I'd personally love the ability to choose whatever outfits and weaponry I want for each single player mission, just like you can do in Hitman World of Assassination. I understand why you're not allowed to do that on the first playthrough, but at the very least I think you should be allowed to do it on a second playthrough, or whenever you're replaying levels in general. It's such a shame that Taxim mode has tons of great customization, but all of that customization is restricted entirely to that game mode. In conclusion, 007 First Light is everything I was hoping it would be when I first heard that IO Interactive was making a James Bond game. My first thought was the same as many, that this studio and this franchise was a match made in heaven. Just like Rocksteady with Batman, just like Insomniac with Spider-Man. And I'm very happy that this game has lived up to everything I thought it would be. I would highly recommend this game to any Bond fan who wants to experience what feels like an authentic James Bond fantasy that allows them to fully embody the iconic spy and makes them feel like they are experiencing an interactive James Bond movie. I have high hopes moving forward when it comes to IO and this franchise, and I really hope that this game is the beginning of a very prosperous future. Anyway, if you made it this far into this video, thanks for giving my content a chance, I really appreciate it. If you're interested in seeing more from me, I cover a lot of movies, shows, and video games I'm interested in, or feel nostalgic for on this channel, so if that sounds like content you'd be interested in, feel free to subscribe. Social media links are also in the pinned comment and description below. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook where I post regular updates about all my creative projects, such as YouTube content, artwork, photography, and updates on my writing work. Oh, and speaking of which, I'm also an author, so if you're interested in reading something new, whether that may be science fiction, fantasy, etc., then feel free to check out my work through the links below. And I'm also about to publish my next book very soon, so definitely stay tuned for it. But with all that being said, thank you so much for checking out my video, and hopefully, I'll see you again in the next one.